Muito bem, agora chegou o momento da palestra especial.
Very well, we have now the special lecture, Perspectives for Regional Development in Brazil. And we are going to have the following speakers: Daniel Ferreira, Deputy Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Regional Development; Paulo Costa, of the Foment Agency of the State of Bahia; Sérgio Caetano Leite, from the Northeast Consortium; Wilson Quinteiro, Executive Secretary of Codesul, Council of the Development and Integration South; and Valdecir Tose, President of the Bank of Amazônia; and Paulo Hickey Costa, President of the Banco de Brasília, BRB. You're all welcome. Thank you, Adalgisa. I'd like to thank all participants in this panel, all of you participating also in the forum. So we are going to present, I hope, interesting information and interesting ideas.
Regional development in Brazil in the last 70 years can be divided into two stages. From the 50s to the 80s is the first period, characterized by a high growth rate. At the end of the 80s, we were aiming at reaching development standards of Spain and Portugal. The model at the time was based on state interference in the economy. With, well, milestones are the creation of BNDES, Petrobras, Bank of Amazonas, the Free Trade Zone, several investments in state-owned companies and petrochemical hubs. And but the model was based on import substitution and had intrinsic weaknesses with lack of innovation. And this model was exhausted at the beginning of the 80s. The second period, from the 80s until now, characterized by low growth. In the beginning of the 80s, the basic idea was to reduce state participation in investments, and so the state began to disinvest through privatization programs. But until now, we haven't yet found a new growth model, although there are initiatives by the federal government, and as we will hear shortly, and initiatives of the states and certain consortia. It's important to highlight that there was a transformation in the concept of development. The modern concept of development is not only about increasing per capita GDP or GDP, but it involves respect for the environment, governance, social issues, how you treat employees, the community, how you interact, and also accountability vis-a-vis society. This is a 2-minute summary of what happened in 80 years. But I thought it would be important for us to begin to discuss the topic. And I'm sure that next talks will focus more generally on federal planning, and then the more regional part with Sérgio and with Wilson. So at this point, since we have so little time, I don't want to get into deeper details on the history of recent economic history. I'd like to give the floor directly to Daniel Ferreira from the Ministry of Regional Development. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, ABDE, for the opportunity to come and talk to you about the regional development policy and financing sources here. And before sharing the presentation, I'd like to make a brief introduction of the Regional Development Ministry, which results from the merging of the former Ministry of Cities and Ministry of National Integration. So it's a Ministry of Regional Development and Urban Development. So both the regional development and urban development policies are under our responsibility here, and we try to tackle a wide range of problems in more than 5,500 municipalities in Brazil, with completely different realities, and some with some sources of resources. The general budget of the Union and the constitutional funds as well for financing, and we operate with the complementariness of these sources. The federal budget focuses on regions where individuals and companies and local governments have less capacity to access credit, and the financing sources. The FGTS, for instance, is focused very much on the severance fund, is focused on regions where the population has more access to credit. And so we try to take a different view, because the issue of reduction of inequality in the less developed regions, the North, Northeast, and Center-West, this is, well, the objective of the Constitution is to reduce regional inequalities. That's on the Constitution. And with this complementarity of sources that I will try to show you in my presentation, we were able in 2020 to give you an idea of the reach of the ministry's actions. We delivered over 6,000 construction works in several municipalities, 17 works a day that we delivered. And these works allowed, for instance, 410,000 families to have access to their own homes. So 1,000 homes a day were delivered in 2020. We perforated a significant number of water wells in the Northeast, allowing families to have access, easier access to drinking water. We delivered water supply systems in several municipalities in the Northeast, and we qualified 17 dams with 38 systems for desalting water. And so with this complementarity of sources, we were able to tackle the main problems of regional and urban development in Brazil. And we know, and what is the challenge? The challenge is to leverage resources and financing in the private sector, because the general budget of the Union, as you all know from news about the budget, it's increasingly scarce for delivery of public policies by the federal government. And so the challenge is to strengthen existing financing mechanisms and leveraging private resources, such as the approval of the regulatory framework for sanitation and changing the logic towards the promotion of PPPs. And you have been witnessing the first operations, or actually the first operations and of major water supply companies. The main thing is to show you the sources of funding. I focused on financing sources. So regional financing overview, comprised of some financing instruments and actions that are part of the regional development policy. Several types of actions focused on water supply, power, microcredit for small entrepreneurs. And the first source is the constitutional financing funds, which are the source of funds are the fiscal exemptions, especially on industrialized products, and the main instrument of the national policy. So here we see the contracts of the three funds, the Constitutional Fund of the North, of the Northeast, and of the Center-West last year. So we have 750,000 operations. And the focus is on micro, or actually small and medium-sized companies. So this is the first instrument. The second instrument is the regional development funds, Amazon, Northeast, and Center-West. This is more focused on major enterprises, and also the fiscal incentives, exemption of up to 75% for companies that operate or that are supported by the regional development policy.
Regarding fiscal incentives, they are administered by the regional ones. Both fiscal incentives and also the regional funds. One other point that is very powerful is the FGTS. While regional funds look at the historical inequalities among the regions, the FGTS has to do with the urban policies, popular and we have roads, we have urban mobility, we have subway, and also requalification of urban centers and integration with other policies, as well as retrofit of buildings. Well, the portfolio of the fund is currently at 400.5 billion in investments. Since the year of 1990, we have invested over this amount. And for the 2021, we anticipate 68.9 billion for the financing of public policy under the Regional Development Ministry, in addition to 8.5 billion earmarked to the concession of discounts in financing of physical entities in the area of housing. So we also work with water and sanitation works, urban mobility, and these are for credit. In addition, these 8.5 billion are non-repayable. So in order to leverage credit for low-income households, the FGTS pays under the value of the house, and it reduces the amount the people have to pay. So. And this leverages the 68.9 billion. As the FGTS can offer this discount, the 70 billion, give or take, end up being earmarked to lower income households, earning up to 4,000 reais per month as their gross income. And they have facilitated access to credit. And we know that in small municipalities and the regions north and northeast, this helps a lot. In the sanitation area, we have over 2,800 operations with investment of 52.6 billion and with a value of loans of approximately 42.7 billion. But, for example, in states such as Paraná, the FGTS was responsible for financing almost 100% of their sanitation systems. When the FGTS actually helps a lot solving the issue of sanitation in Brazil. And we need to bear this in mind when we plan future operations. We have some actions here in the ministry. I can't go into detail in all of them. But we have a working group to discuss again the issues of regional funds. They are in the single account of the treasury. We need to find ways to leverage operations and make these resources, even though they are budget resources, since they are financial expenditure, they do not go through the ceiling. So the regional funds do not impact the ceiling and this gives us a very powerful tool for leveraging resources. So we can focus on private sector projects so that we can leverage things in the private sector for good projects. We also changed the logic of the constitutional funds. We have one single ordinance to make all the concepts uniform and actually earmarked to the regional funds. We also have one line which is for the pandemics with the resolution number 4.798 with authorization for the renegotiation of credit operations carried out with constitutional funds. So there's help in this area too. And there is also another discussion proposed by the regional development ministry to actually expand the deadline for repayment. We have two provisional measures, 1016 and 1017, to authorize a renegotiation of debts regarding the constitutional funds so that we can recover capital for new applications. When there is historical default, we facilitated negotiations and liquidation. One was approved yesterday in the House of Representatives, which was Measure 1017. Regarding the 1016, together with the interministry ordinance, we have 9.1 billion reais in debt, 5.2 in rural debt, and 3.9 billion in non-rural debt. So we're talking about 300,000 physical and legal entities. There's a huge amount of financing showing how comprehensive is this impact? So 87% of this debt are up to 20,000 reais, and almost 90% are debts of up to 100,000 reais. So these debts were seen or used to be seen as a loss. And when we renegotiate, we can bring them back to us. These are the opportunities identified in investment funds, and these are investments in the Amazon and the Northeast. They used to be fed by options of fiscal waivers throughout the country, but they were used to the acquisition of debentures. And for different reasons, they did not work.
And so the default rate reached over 99%. And so to allow for renegotiation and trying to bring these resources back to the cash of the funds so that we can redirect them to other kinds of operations other than those already done with different rationales, liquidating these funds and focusing on constitutional funds and regional funds. And as I said, for structuring projects and leveraging private resources, whose source of resources would be those coming from the renegotiations. And so more than 370 projects were concluded or cancelled or excluded from the portfolio in the last 15 years. The expectation is to reach 5 billion reais in total amounts, generating return of up to 1 billion reais. And so considering a default rate of 99%, this seems to be a very good target. And this renegotiation covers more than or reaches more than 1,700 companies. And so this measure can bring resources to the cash of the funds, leveraging new with so with the FGTS, the challenge is to transform the public sector lines, make them more attractive. We are working with nominal rates of 6% a year, plus the banking spread, and this reaches the municipalities at 9% a year. In low Selic scenario, this is already a bit too high, and so we are trying to debureaucratize the process, the analysis by Caixa Econômica Federal and others, such as ABDE, are doing so that these lines will be more attractive for the public sector. On the other hand, we are working with the Ministry of the Economy to review the limit of indebtedness by the Monetary Council, because by not distinguishing between financing lines, which on the one hand makes a lot of sense because the market logic should be based on the market. On the other hand, it brings together very distinct lines, such as working capital and funding of basic sanitation. We know that a basic sanitation project is a major project, and in order to grant funding, the project needs to be analyzed. There's unit cost analysis, credit capacity, whether the collateral is from the union, then it goes through the National Treasury, and so there's a maturity time, and indebtedness today is exhausted before these operations become a reality. And so the only source of financing of the federal government today, given the current budget, which is scarce, is the FGTS. So this has been hindering this new approach by the Monetary Council has been hindering, but the Ministry of the Economy is sensitive to this, and we've been talking to them to try to find a solution, whether it is through financing without federal government collateral or with federal government collateral. Within the FGTS, we have the investment fund, the FGTS investment fund for purchase of CRIs and debentures, especially debentures in the energy, railway, ports, airports sectors, and sanitation sectors. And so of the sectoral policies of the MDR, the only one contemplated by the law is sanitation. We are trying with the operator, Caixa Econômica Federal, and the members of the investment committee. We are trying to direct a minimum percentage of investments to sanitation, because we have a public call open at the moment, and with the new regulatory framework, we might achieve a migration. Perhaps we will discontinue sanitation for all, which is the public sector program within the FGTS, and the portfolio will migrate to acquisition of bonds, and with a different resource mobilization rationale, much less bureaucratic, with different kinds of analysis and reviews and so on. So we have updated the limits or thresholds for sale or investment in real estate, and so these thresholds have been updated, especially in small municipalities, trying to redirect FGTS to the north and northeast. We know that the smaller municipalities are concentrated in north and northeast, and with the amounts, investment amounts at the time, companies were not interested in building, and so we did this first update. It wasn't ideal, but we are trying to leverage works in the north and northeast. And we revisited the remuneration of financial agents to decrease interest rates. We were able to reduce them to the lowest level historically of the fund, with a focus on north and northeast. The biggest reductions were in north and northeast, where historically borrowers find it more difficult to be approved by the credit analysis of the banks. And so we want them to access credit using the most powerful instrument that we have, which is the FGTS. Although we have this regional focus, we have reduced interest rates for the whole country. And we are trying to introduce the ESG agendas, and Minister has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Climate Bonds Initiative to promote the use of green bonds to finance regional development. So the idea is to prioritize these projects in credit supply and use of budgetary resources. So very in summary form, these are the main sources: the constitutional funds and FGTS. So we have the challenge of defining non-rural interest rates by, so this has been defined in law, and we are looking at this to try to bring these rates and other rates, the FGTS and, for example, and other special laws, lines. So we are trying to bring this into the National Monetary Council so that we can, the possibility of revisiting them, and definition of prefixed interest rates for microcredit, and possibility of operations with guaranteeing funds, a proposal to guarantee bigger operations, because with scarce resources, we will be able to leverage private capital. And so we are focusing on structuring of projects. So in FGTS, starting with the third one, which is the review of the debt limits of the public sector, we are trying to attract new financial agents, and we're in contact with ABDE, representing banks in the council, to understand why, although for some banks the financing is not conducted, and what are the restrictions created by Caixa Econômica and other bureaucratic barriers, because we have a spread which is defined through a resolution, and it's a maximum spread. It's not a fixed spread. And in practice, we operate with a maximum because there is virtually a monopoly. And the Caixa Econômica Federal is a major partner of the government, operating popular housing with expertise, with capillarity, a fantastic network. So I'm not criticizing it. It's just thinking about the borrower.
And this change benefits the target audience of the program. So we need to find mechanisms to attract new financial agents into play, both for sanitation, mobility, which are larger ones, etc. And also we need to improve the credit lines. Selic is quite high, and the same way that housing made this movement, we want to make movements as well, looking at the sustainability of funds, which is essential, to make lines more attractive. So some municipalities still don't find these credit lines attractive, so we try to improve at all times. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I will say goodbye now due to another meeting, and here we are at your service for questions, for listening to new ideas and proposals. We are always open. Thank you all very much.
Daniel, muito obrigado pela sua participação.
Thank you, Daniel, for your participation. We know that you need to leave. So we know that there are urgent calls sometimes. And so we are subject to this, and sometimes we have to leave. And very important, this excellent work in the area of housing, very necessary for the poorer segments of the population. And as the ABDE, we have a lot to discuss regarding development funds, interaction with the local governments. It may be that we have inside ABDE some formed agencies that can talk to you, and we can make available this interaction and joint action between the ministry and ABDE. So I could see that the ministry is quite large. You focused on the financial line and side, but there's quite a lot of information that will take us a while to digest. So both regarding housing and sanitation, I believe there's a lot for us to speak about, and as well as the area of development and new agents, financial agents through the FGTS. Thank you for your participation. Have a good meeting and good afternoon. And we will certainly talk to you in the near future for us to have this interaction between you and ABDE. Thank you. Yes, we are at your service. Thank you.
Na sequência, né, agora que a gente está sem o Daniel, temos que improvisar pouco, mas eu acho que existem algumas ações regionais.
There are some regional actions, as we have in Rio Grande do Sul and also in the Northeast, that gather states in consortia. In the south, we have Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Mato Grosso do Sul. It is a Codesul, a very much well-known in ABDE, and Codesul works with BRDE, a major collaborator by ABDE, so I'd like to give the floor to Wilson.
O Wilson está como coordenador, né, Wilson?
You're coordinator, right, Wilson? Executive Secretary.
Mas é a mesma coisa. Então, o Wilson é o secretário.
Similar. He's the Executive Secretary of Codesul. You have the floor, Wilson. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the coordination of this event and also to salute all participating in this panel. I'd like to thank ABDE for giving us this opportunity. Chris, who has talked to us quite a lot as well in this coordination, and something very important for us to exchange ideas. I will be very brief. I will speak fast because we have little time. And Daniel presented very well. We do need to have this coordination and liaison with the ministry through Daniel. Codesul is a council for integration. It started in 1961 with 3 states, Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and Santa Catarina, and then Mato Grosso came also on board. I had the opportunity of being the operations director of BRDR before I went to Codesul. So until 2015, BRDR only financed the private sector. It was interesting with several areas. But afterwards, we started to finance the public sector as well in this approach of sustainability, making BNDR the major fomenting agency. And we are having good results of this integration. In addition to integrating these 3 states with the industry, commerce, innovation, and so many topics, Codesul also has an approach of international liaison. And in this new model of Codesul, we are integrating with international agencies and entities, talking to chambers of commerce in several countries, and looking at investments that are international to our southern region, investment consortia, and taking forward the BRDE. And something that also makes a lot of sense with the experience that we have there, we are developing sectors such as trade confederation, trade federation, agricultural federation, industrial federation, all focusing on the development of cities as well, which is very important in the area of infrastructure. And a model that we have as an example I'd like to give. The project is 3C, 3C, 3 cities, 3 continents. So it is the city of Maringá, where I come from. We have the city of Barcelos in Europe, and we integrated these two cities as well as another city in China. And we are working together in several issues. This model is underway, and it can be a model for the country to develop cities. And I'd like to say as well that unfortunately, the South region does not have the constitutional fund. When you all speak about it, sometimes I hear BRB, BASA, FCO. We only have one agency of BRDE in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. It is coming back into activity and integrating. So I regretted the fact that Daniel left, because I will ask ABDE to address this topic later on with investment funds for regional issues.
So that's just a quick presentation, and Banco is an instrument for integration and development that opens dialogue both with regional organizations and also national organizations and international organizations for the development of the whole system. Thank you, Wilson, for the interesting information about Codesul. So you don't have a constitutional fund as we do in the Northeast, but you created the BRDE, which has been doing excellent work. The creation of a regional fund is a matter to be discussed with the ministry. And I agree with you that we should open between ABDE and the ministry a closer dialogue. So we are going to leave Rio Grande do Sul and move to the Northeast to learn about an experience that is similar to yours, but well, the Northeast Consortium is probably created about 3 years ago. And so from the perspective of regional development, how did the Northeast Consortium, Sérgio Caetano, well known here, he is going to explain how it works, what he's been doing, and perspectives, prospects, current prospects. Sérgio. Good afternoon. I'd like to greet ABDE for the wonderful initiative, Paulo, Wilson, Paulo Hickey. Greetings, and to all of you who are watching us. The Northeast Consortium is 2 years old. It was founded 2 years ago. It's a consortium bringing together the 9 states of the Northeast, and it's multi-purpose. It operates in health, infrastructure, and several other areas such as environment, sustainability, financing of productive chains and of the states. The consortium is in a region, located in a region that has the BND, the Northeast Bank. There's a constitutional fund, and Sudene with obligations, constitutional obligations, including a regional development plan for the Northeast. Unfortunately, these instruments don't work in integration. So our relationship with the BNB is beginning now. With Sudene, also, we had some issues, and the Constitutional Fund is operated by the Bank of the Northeast. And so, in spite of the existence of these tools that should contribute in integration towards development, this is one of the challenges that the consortium faces, to promote integration of the different instruments available in the region. Regarding the development institutions, the consortium sees these institutions as fundamental for the implementation of regional public policies. It is through this integration that public policies will reach the ground. There's an institution here, BRB, that is promoting the migration from its region of origin to the Northeast. We see this favorably because this helps face the main barriers to financing. And the challenges to financing today are related to the fiscal situation of the states. It's hard to mobilize resources through normal instruments, just credit. It's a problem that affects the whole country, but it affects the 9 northeastern states more strongly. And we've seen a reduction of sovereign guarantees by the federal government that would allow the states to reach out to multilateral development agencies. And so the pursuit of resources with these challenges, how to facilitate the mobilization of resources, the raising of resources, with this situation of sovereign guarantees and the other issues. And so on the positive side, we see a change in the business environment. This change in the business environment is driven by external elements as well. And so we are close to the 2030, we are reaching the end of the 2030 agenda, and this has caused certain international and multilateral institutions, and such as Black Hawk and several institutions, if the investments are not adherent to the SDGs and taking into account the SDGs and ESGs, they will not join. And so additionally, we have the third sector and sustainable financing increasing in weight, and we have conducted a recent study, and I would say to you that those reading the conclusions of the study on the business environment and going back 4 or 5 years ago would believe they were on another planet, because there's a greater willingness of philanthropic capital. The development agenda has brought about opportunities, and the changes, companies, the fiscal agenda, the green mechanisms, the green tools create the possibility of mobilizing resources and investments, transcending a mere loan or leverage, traditional leverage that we know. This brings challenges for the development finance institutions. We see a greater weight of the capital market as with important tools. And so development banks and agencies need to adapt to this new reality. There's innovation. ABDE participates in a very important forum, the LABI at CVM, in constant dialogue with international organizations and members and levels of the federal government, discussing legislation on infrastructure debentures and creating green bonds. And so we see the emergence of the sandbox and its application in practice. And so the business environment, on the one hand, is favorable. Perhaps the only way we have to tackle challenges in the next 2-3 years, it's inevitable. The mainstreaming of this new agenda is inevitable. On the other hand, it's a challenge to understand how private funds work, how endowment funds work, water green bonds, water sustainable bonds. And so to understand this new reality is a big challenge for development institutions. BMDG, for instance, raising external resources with the IDP and mobilizing resources from the beginning of the pandemic, and a major program for expansion of renewable energy. And so we have concrete examples, and the consortium organized the financing of the productive chain of family farming associated with OMCT. And a few years ago, how we would never imagine a meeting within CVM with MSCT, with the landless movement. And so these are the changes of paradigm, social movements coming closer to the capital market. And so funds were raised in the South. Of course, the Northeast Consortium was not involved in that. And Sarauapia, Bahia, and this was, well, if this were a stock exchange operation, we might say that there was an over demand for these bonds. And so these are concrete examples.
There's another challenge regarding public-private arrangements going over even partnerships. It is a contract. It is a part with specific characteristics. We have Ceará innovating the bridge, the largest infrastructure project, around 6 billion in investments in Bahia, regardless of difficulties. So we do have favorable trade environment, and also a huge challenge of welcoming capital markets, new tools, and migrating towards the agenda and the sustainability agenda. It is present, and I want to believe that we will all leave these pandemics looking at the world in a different way, in the way that we relate with more empathy and inclusion. So the Northeast Consortium created a resolution, a platform of investment with a broad mandate to relate to national and multilateral and international institutions looking to structure investment. We work with at least 3 funds: family farming, agriculture, and sanitation. There is another subject that is larger. We try and work. At least these 3 are on the table. Regarding the ESG, environmental, social, and governance rules, so this concern is natural in the Northeast. If we divide the amount of standing forest by the square kilometers of the state, it is going to be close to the Amazon. And how to value, how to monetize these resources? By just carried out a survey certified by Deloitte of only one region, and the amount was 1.5 billion in terms of environmental assets. We are working in this platform. The ESG criteria are in everything that the Northeast does. Social and environmental areas are present in the agendas of all 9 governors of all the 9 states. And here we're talking about public governance and not private. And we have a partnership with the Federal Court of Accounts, with actions such as training, and it is leading the modernization of public governance. The more we invest in this area, the easiest will be to attract investment to the region. Well, the consortia is very much concerned with engaging the FDIs, not only the foment agencies, but banks as well. And out of the 9 states of the Northeast, 6 have fomenting agencies. So we want to liaise, we want to promote the modernization of these agencies. And the way that we deal with the public management and these with these institutions, because someone will need to be there having or providing credit operations so that funds can receive that as assets in the end. And the best path to reach solidarity groups, we need to work with them. Also, credit cooperatives are doing quite a lot of work here in our region. Yesterday we had a meeting with them. So the modernization of IFDs is very dear for us because we understand it is crucial and instrumental. And with this, I would like to conclude by saying that we are at your service to answer questions and hear you. For Wilson, I'd like to leave here the invitation for the exchange of experience. We have this collaboration with other consortia, and it has been fruitful. Thank you. Thank you, Sergio. Since we are late, we are going to need to go fast. Obviously, financing. You've worked in bank, Wilson too, so it is more and more important in development. Who was working in the financial area there? New forms emerged to evaluate projects. We are not very much used to them yet, but of course, we need to look at other aspects beyond the financial ones. They are challenges that we need to adapt to. It is time for us to listen to Paulo Hickey. He works with Caixa Econômica, he is now at PRB, the Bank of Brasilia. It is a very large credit portfolio, and they are carrying out wonderful work there. I looked at your website, and you go from microcredit to infrastructure investment. It is quite complicated. So I'd like to listen to you now, Paulo. You have the floor. Good afternoon, Paulo, and all of you participating in this panel. It is great being here and accepting an ABDE invitation. Such relevant topic for our country in terms of development. First, I'd like to comment a bit on the experience of BRB. BRB, the Bank of Brasilia. I have been here for 2 years. The bank used to be very much focused on credit, on another type of credit. And yes, we now have a focus of being an agent for transformation, increasing quality of life and also income of the region, also influencing entrepreneurship, productive sector, and at the same time using all the mechanisms of an institution, of a financial institution, to provide financing. So we changed the strategic plan for the bank, and we started to grow significantly in all fronts. We preserved our origin, but because we grew 60% in the traditional credit that we give, consignado. But we also have financing for micro and small entrepreneurs. We also finance infrastructure, mobility, implementing a concept and a strategy of a full bank or complete bank, comprehensive bank. We need to have gains of scale. We need to work digitally, and we need to offer a portfolio of products from microcredit to development financing to the other. BRB also launched a digital bank. It is quite well known because we have a partnership with the Flamengo. It's a football team, very popular one. And the amount of accounts in this new modality is greater than the traditional bank. We had 340,000 in the traditional banking model, and we now have 460,000 in the digital bank. Oh, no, it went actually to over 1 million clients. And now, Paulo, I'd like to comment on 3 things that were said here.
In Daniel's presentation, he addressed a very important issue, which is the funding sources, the role of the FGTS, of the regional funds as sources of funds to finance development. And he gave us his view of the future. I'd like to highlight an important point, which is the simplification of the use of these resources and democratizing of the management of these resources. Today, there is high concentration in few institutions, always federal institutions. And if we really want these resources to get to the ground and make a difference, it's important to increase competitiveness and access, reducing conflicts of interest. When the thresholds to be approved for financial agents are assessed by other financial institutions that compete for the same resources, then there's an issue to be addressed. Another point is the role, our role as development financing institutions. We often focus on the role of credit. Of course, credit is a very important inducer, driver of development, but we need to think of other things. So my suggestion is that ABDE, our association that convenes and organizes and stimulates thought in this field, that we should have more integration. As Sergio said, this integration, coordination, means that institutions with greater capacity can stimulate development agencies with less financial capacity. We've been working with the Consortium of Central Brazil and the Consortium of the Northeast. We recognize the role that they have so that they can stimulate development agencies in each state so that they will channel the resources that we have to provide, that we can provide, and also the issue of credit, the review of processes, the use of data in a more active way. One of the topics addressed by the previous panel, so that credit concession can be more precise, simpler, more direct, and at greater volumes. A lot is said about the role of regional banks and development banks in stimulating social programs. I see that institutions can add efficiency elements and innovation elements, technology, and customer experience, the experience of citizens, thereby reducing costs for the entities of the Federation. And so BRB implemented together with the government of the Federal District 8 social programs benefiting 180,000 families, approximately 20% of the population of the Federal District. Through different cash transfer programs, income transfer programs, the simplest one involved the replacement of the delivery of basic food baskets by a card. This took 6 days to implement and greatly reduced the cost of logistics and gave people the opportunity to choose what they want to purchase and where they want to purchase. So we need to think also how development banks stimulate sports, leisure, culture, and business in these areas. So how can we operate through different kinds of mechanisms, stimulating handcraft, stimulating local culture promoters? We are adopting the open markets and placing banking correspondents and offering credit and fostering financial education among the workers of street markets. And so this has an important impact on people's lives. Another point we have been emphasizing, and I didn't talk to Sergio beforehand, but how can we use capital market mechanisms in the context of fiscal restriction? It's important to look for solutions that are not necessarily related to credit. And so monetization of the public debt, structuring of real estate investment funds so that states can use their real estate to monetize and create alternative sources of resources, demobilizing their balances and turning this into actions that will generate income. And so another case that we are proud of that we initiated here, it's a technological hub. The state provided the land, and we are raising 5 billion reais to transform the central plain of Brazil into a new Silicon Valley and trying to generate development through technological innovation. Paulo, can you please sum up? We still have Valdecir. So, and also raising resources, mobilizing resources, foreign resources. And so Brazil is a very rich country, given the structure and number of financing, development financing institutions. So coordination of a broader agenda will produce important results and reduce social inequalities, stimulate development, generate jobs and income. Thank you. Thank you, Paulo, for the information and what you've been doing in BRB. I agree that well, ABDE is the instrument for this. We do need to learn of the experiences of the agencies. We should not compete among ourselves with each other. This mutual learning is very valuable. It is the main focus of the ABDE's work. It's important to know what you've been doing. I agree fully when you say that the function, the role of development agency or institution is not just consigned credit. We need to do something to change the nature of the social environment. We have very little time, so we will now hear our dear friend, an experienced friend, Valdecir from the Bank of the Amazon. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, everyone at ABDE for the invitation. I'll try to be really brief. I need to provide some background because Amazon has been through several economic cycles, and it's important to understand this. And so history brings a lot of important inputs, especially in terms of what not to do. So we went through several economic cycles, extractivism, timber cycle, which still continues, mining cycle, which is still a great potential. After timber, there's stock raising, then agriculture, then industry based on tax subsidies. And so Amazon has been through several models defined by different governments as fit for development. And we arrived at a model which is based on extraction and exploitation rather than valuing of what exists in the Amazon. And so there are several challenges for the Amazon. And as a development bank for the region, we need to tackle these challenges. The main challenge is to initially contain deforestation and forest fires. It's no use thinking of development without this. This will provide greater security for credit operations. And together with this stronger containment, there needs to be stimulus for sustainability activities with the Bank of the Amazon and other development agencies providing credit lines. And the bank has created green credit lines, and through all the other, well, we are also through working with other cooperatives and banks, we have been looking for more arms to operate in the region. And of course, this all entails de-bureaucratization. The pandemic has been helpful. Several government measures have de-bureaucratized credit, especially on the government side, and certain measures that used to delay and hinder access to credit for the population. In the Amazon, we need to think also of credit education, education for entrepreneurship and innovation. And so one cannot think of credit, sustainable agribusiness credit without thinking of rural technical assistance that is consistent to help small entrepreneurs, because big entrepreneurs will adapt. They will have to stop deforesting and start compensating, otherwise they will not be able to sell their production. But the small entrepreneurs, they need guidance and professional education, especially in entrepreneurship. That's part of the challenges of the region, and the bank, through its financing, stimulates technical assistance and education of small entrepreneurs for sustainable economic activities. On the part of innovation and technology, that's very important. Embrapa, other research institutes and universities are very important, and the support that is needed through models and publicity and programs. The bank annually launches research calls and geared towards production, and so certain research calls for proposals geared towards results, geared towards business, and this is very advantageous. Legal certainty is very important for infrastructure projects and any other project in the Amazon region. In the Amazon region, there are areas that are, well, if in an indigenous reserve, for instance, you cannot simply expand or reduce these reserves abruptly, because this creates an uncertain environment for entrepreneurs and the banks.
And FNO is an important resource, and the bank is creating stronger conditions for FNO, but we're also looking for other resources, other sources of resources. And with national and international partners and integrating stakeholders for anything. It is difficult to say that, but it is simple, even in deforestation, because it is concentrated in two main states, Pará and Mato Grosso, in spots, in hotspots of deforestation. So nowhere where it's happening. And there needs to be the participation of mayors, entities, association of producers, and also involving society. This is not an international cause. It is important to the Amazon, demonstrating to the national population and the world population that it is important, and this population living here, we need support. We need for their products to be purchased, and the Bank of the Amazon is providing some actions, some initiatives in this area. We are starting to monitor these activities, not only in concession, but also monitoring producers, companies that are financed, creating green products of FNO green, or the green FNO. They have a different value of financing and also period of repayment. The structure as well, infrastructure, we do need to speak about water, sanitation, telecommunications, and microfinance. As regards microfinance, the Bank of Amazon is the main bank financing microfinance. We have a portfolio of 150 million, but we intend to grow. And this activity is very important, and this target that are social, environmental, and climate targets that are adequate for the region, because it is very sensitive region. If you are too strict, you will not finance anything. But at the same time, we need to modernize activities, bringing technology, innovation for the activities to be sustainable a long time. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Valdecir, for your presentation. So I should give the floor back to all of you for final remarks, but we are very late, and so I will have to thank you all for your participation and for the opportunity of listening to all of you. Thank you, ABDE, for the invitation. We are always here at your service